Let's do a close reading of London, the poem by William Blake. I wander through each chartered streets, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. This is a very scary poem. It can be related to the onset of the Industrial Revolution in the 1770s and how the Industrial Revolution was transforming society from bottom to top. And where the speaker of the poem is wandering through the city that's been transformed by industrial waste, by choking smoke, by all kinds of unsavory and unclean conditions. And he's wandering around and he's looking through this hellish environment that has been created by the Industrial Revolution, and he is appalled by what he sees. It's like he's a guide through the chaotic experience of living in London in the early industrial revolutionary period, and noticing and observing what's around him and seeing the world as a physical hell on earth. Let's remember that the background of this poem is the French Revolution, which enters into the poem directly in the line runs in blood down palace walls. By the time Blake engraved the poem in 1794, what had been the promise of individual and collective freedom of the French Revolution had become what is referred to as the Reign of Terror. The land owned by French Catholic monasteries was nationalized in November 1789, 4 months after the freeing of prisoners from the Bastille in Paris. Though slavery is abolished in France in 1791, inflation rose in 1792, leading people to riot in Paris because of the high price of food. On September 21st, 1792, monarchy was abolished in France. The Reign of Terror under Robespierre takes place from 1793 to 1794, and the guillotine, which was used for the first time in 1792, is used to kill many thousands, including King Louis the 16th, who had ascended to the throne in 1774, and he was killed on January 21st, 1793. On February 1st of that year, 1793, France declares war on Great Britain, the Dutch Republic, and Spain. This leads England to declare war on France 10 days later. On October 16th, 1793, Marie Antoinette, the wife of King Louis the 16th, is also executed, and England, whose king is George III, suspends habeas corpus, which protects people from being imprisoned or arrested without just cause. He does this, King George, out of fear that the French Revolution is going to spread into England and cause riots and mayhem. These are the dire events that form the background to Blake's London. I wander, a speaker is wandering, is walking, is meandering, is observing the town as he walks through the town. And it's a town he seems to no longer be able to recognize. He's wandering through each chartered street. So if we think about how language is foregrounded again in works of literature, chartered is a very strange word. Chartered. What could this mean? There is a sense of it being at once mapped out or laid out. And also it's related to the Magna Carta. So charter comes from charta. Magna Carta, I'm sorry. And that document from 1215 is a document in which some human rights, some individual rights were first granted. So that's the beginning of where we end up with the rights of man and the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That can be traced back to the Magna Carta. So chartered is related to the idea of having rights, but it's also ironically related to the idea in the Industrial Revolution that the streets and the world around all these people, it's charted out, it's mapped out for monetary gain, and it's truncated, it's made unavailable to others. I wander through each chartered street. So the chartered streets being choked by the charteredness, by the mapping out, by the industrial greed. Near where the chartered, again, foregrounded language, it's repeated in the very next line, as if Blake wants us to see it and not miss it, for sure. The chartered Thames does flow. Thames is the river that runs through London, divides the city, and it's pronounced Thames. And mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe, as if others that he sees, their faces, they cannot comprehend what's happening to them. They cannot fathom how much pain they're in, how they're living in sordid conditions, that they cannot raise their children properly, that there's not proper sanitation, that disease is rampant, that there are many, many problems. Healthcare is practically non-existent for most people. There isn't enough money. And this is during the Revolutionary period, right after the Revolutionary period. And Revolutionary period being the French Revolutionary period. And notice how we switch from vision, I mark, I see. In every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. Again, mark and marks is mentioned 3 times. So 2 words, chartered and marks, or mark, is found 5 times in this first stanza. We can also notice that this stanza, like the others in the poem, is made of 4 lines. And 4-line stanzas traditionally in English poetry is considered a quatrain, Q-U-A-T-R-A-I-N. So this is a quatrain versus a couplet, which is 2 lines that generally rhyme. So we have 4 lines. In every cry, now we switch from visual marking to sound. So sound becomes predominant throughout the rest of the poem. So he marks weakness, marks of woe in every cry. And notice how many times the word cry is repeated. And also every, as if everyone is crying out in this diabolical, hellish environment. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear. Infants aren't supposed to feel fear, aren't they? I mean, they're an infant. They're being protected by their parents. But this has infected this hellish environment. This torment has infected even the youngest in the population. In every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, mind-forged manacles I hear. in every voice, in every proclamation against something. And banns were, in Shakespeare's time forward, were when someone was to be wed, the minister or priest would ask if anyone objected. And those bans, objections, were to have been posted in the church saying that this person shouldn't marry this person because he's a criminal or what have you. Those bans were posted. So here, every voice in every ban, in every argument against something. The mind-forged manacles I hear. Mind-forged. That is probably the phrase that is most confusing to people. And I have a quote here. A writer named E.P. Thompson tells us that mind-forged manacles are those of deceit, self-interest, absence of love, repression, hypocrisy, unquote. So, mind forged, forging the mind of a person, so bending it, shaping it by all of these horrifying things: deceit, self-interest, absence of love, repression. So the mind of these people are being the infant, the man, everyone, every, is being melded by the social forces around them, the social forces that are so destructive. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls. Chimney sweepers were very young children, usually under the age of 10, mostly boys, but there were some girls in England, and only in England that I know of, who were apprenticed, quote unquote, so they were very ill paid for their labor, but they were apprenticed at a very young age when they were still very small to climb up inside chimneys. So chimneys in London were very, very narrow, and they got clogged with soot. And these children were forced by their apprentices and by the society at large, really, to climb up inside these chimneys and clean them out with their bodies so that the soot would cling to their clothes and cling to their skin and unclog the chimney. I have another source, Peter Ackroyd, who writes about Blake. He says that the chimney sweepers were generally sold between the age of 4 and 7. So they were sold between 4 and 7. They either left the poorhouse in batches or were individually bartered by their parents, who would accept between 20 and 30 shillings for their 7-year quote-unquote apprenticeship. The average size of the vents there was a great need for the chimney sweeper services in London where the flues were characteristically narrow or twisted so that they easily become constricted. The average size of these vents was something like 7 inches square, and the small child was prodded or pushed into the even smaller spaces within. Sometimes they were encouraged with poles or pricked with pines or scorched first to make them climb with more enthusiasm. Scorched as in with fire. Of course, many died of suffocation, while others grew deformed. Many others suffered from what were known as, quote, sooty warts, or cancer of the scrotum. They finished their work at noon, at which time they were turned upon the streets, all of them in rags, some of them, it seems, without any clothing at all of them unwashed, poor, hungry. It's no wonder that they were typically classified with beggars and with vagrants, considered to be criminals. And that's from Peter Ackroyd, pages 124 through 125, in a book called Blake. So this is what Blake himself is seeing. how the or in this case, hearing how the chimney sweeper's cries, every blackening church appalls. The church should be taking care of these children, but instead they're turning a blind eye and not paying attention, like everyone else in that society, because again, they needed the children to go up into the flues, up into the thin chimneys. So Blake is objecting to how the church is treating these children, and he's empathizing with the children through their cries. And notice he can't see them ostensibly because they're in the chimney, and he's objecting to their overall treatment. And the hapless, so every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls, hapless, unable to be happy, very sorrow-filled in this hellish environment, in this dark, dreary, deeply objectionable, deeply disturbing environment. And it runs down blood in palace walls. So the soldiers had been fighting for a good cause, a beneficial cause, one that would help all the people in France and then in other countries, including perhaps England. Yet now they're just a heap. They've given up, and in their place, as they kind of lie at the base of the palace walls, and the palace, remember, is associated with the monarch, and the monarch has been executed, and so has the queen by this point, and many, many other people. And all this blood is rolling off the palace walls, as if the palace itself was bleeding and causing the blood to run off like water, the palace, the walls of the palace, and drain onto the street, drain into the lives of the people, affecting the people, infecting the people. And Blake is greatly concerned. But most, he says, the speaker of this poem, who's guiding us through this view of his town, most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlots curse. Youthful harlots curse. Three very, very emotionally fraught words. Youthful, and in those days it would have been early teens, like 13, 14. Harlot, prostitute, someone who is exchanging her body for money because she has no other way to make a living. She probably has children. Mostly those children would probably have come from her intercourse with various quote-unquote gentlemen in that society, and she would have no way to provide for these children. And here she is in a situation where she's already probably had kids at age 14, is selling her body for money, is contracting various diseases. At this period, there would not have been penicillin, of course. That's a century or more away. And that girl would have been giving other diseases to other people, as well as having diseases herself, various venereal diseases. And so her curse is the curse of her life, the curse of her plight, but also the curse of the disease itself, which was called, and is still sometimes called, the curse. Gonorrhea, syphilis, especially syphilis, which is deadly at this period of time. So we move from her, and how her curse blasts the newborn infant's tear. And if we move up to the second stanza, we see the infant's cry, and then we move down to the fourth stanza, and that cry has transformed into tears, as if this child, this infant, is already an adult in this terrifying world. And that adult, that infant, as an adult, is expressing his remorse by crying. The infant is not crying tears that infants normally cry, which is just crying in general, right? Whenever, we don't really know why they cry because they can't speak. But these tears seem to be a result of the world around the infant, as if the infant already at 6 months, 8 months, knows the terrifying world he or she has been born into. And blights, a blight like a tree blight, it kills the trees. A blight and blights. So this harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear. Blasts is a strange verb there. It's like the social conditions make maternal comfort impossible because she is a prostitute. She's not there for the child when the child needs her. And blasts, it's as if there's her curse explodes the infant's cries. Explodes the infant into tears, and he has no other response to the world that he lives in. So her curse blasts, and then her curse blights with plagues, again related to venereal disease, possibly related to the social conditions in which she lives, related to the industrial world that she's now a part of and must get by as well she can with very limited resources, very few jobs, or if the jobs do exist, they're in factories and they are 14-hour days, 16-hour days. Even children work those hours in those factories in the early industrial period. So Blake is hitting real hard here. He's exposing this world as he sees it, as something very dangerous and deadly. Blights with plagues the marriage hearse. The marriage hearse, apparently a reference to the passing of venereal disease again by mothers to their children, to other men, and that man then goes to his wife and has marital sex with her and passes the venereal disease to her. So the whole society is being infected, just as the whole society is infected with the darkness that is like a pall that is over this entire city. Not a very cheery poem, but the world is not at times a very cheery place. So to think about these words as symbols, as representative of what is happening. So look what happens with the children. The chimney sweepers and the infant are both symbolic of what is going on with children at the time of the writing and publishing of this poem. Thank you for listening.